started. I'm going to be one of your hosts today. My name is Riley Williams. I am the Community Outreach Coordinator here at the CMTA, but I also live with CMT Type 1A. So I'm excited to join this webinar just as a community member. I feel that physical therapy is a really hot topic, so I'm excited to learn from Dr. Ramdharry and just hear her expertise. She is incredible. I wanted to go over a few boring housekeeping rules before we get started. I ask kindly that everyone please mute themselves while Dr. Ramdharry is speaking, just so that we can be mindful of our other community members so that Zoom doesn't pick up any funky background noises. I wanted to let everyone know that this will be recorded. So if you don't catch something during the meeting or want to go back and listen, you will receive the Zoom recording after this meeting. And if you have absolutely any questions during the webinar, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We are going to try our absolute best to answer all of them towards the end of the hour. But before I introduce our wonderful guest speaker, I wanted to allow my partner in crime, Laurel Richardson, to introduce herself and just say hi to the community.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being with us. I'm Laurel Richardson. Kudos to Riley for planning this incredible second quarter lunch and learn. We are honored to have Dr. Ramdharry with us. She is one of my most favorite people in the CMT world and just truly understands what we're all going through. I live with 1A, but thank you for being here. Thank you to Riley for planning. We also have other teammates on the Zoom today, so be sure to reach out in the chat and put your questions in, and we will do our best to get to all of them. So thanks, Riley.
Absolutely. Thank you, Laurel. Without further ado, I'm very excited. Dr. Ramdharry has been very easy to work with, and she has made this my first official lunch and learn planning very easy. So thank you to her. So without further ado, I want to welcome Dr. Gita Ramdharry. She started her career in 1995 as a physical therapist and has worked very closely in the muscular dystrophy and muscular disease space. So we are very, very excited to welcome her and hear from her expertise. Whenever you're ready.
Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here at lunchtime. It's actually 5 p.m. in the evening here. I see a couple of familiar faces, people who are in the UK with me on the call here. What I'll do, I've got some slides. It's probably about a half hour, maybe slightly more, but then hopefully that leaves us lots of time for the discussion, for the questions, because I can talk a lot, quite frankly. So it's probably nice for you to have a break from me talking. So let me see if I can share my screen and hopefully let me know if this is all visible.
Yes.
Yeah, everyone can see that. I might not be able to see you because I'll have my sort of my presenter screen on. So I might not see if questions come up. So are we leaving those to the end, Riley? Do you think?
Yes, ma'am. We're gonna leave them to the end, and then I can ask them out loud, and then you can answer them if that works well for you.
Perfect. So yes, thank you for the introduction. So yes, I've been a physiotherapist. We're physiotherapists over here, but we're the same as your PTs. It's just semantics. So been a physio for a long time. And I've been seeing people who live with CMT, gosh, actually, probably since that 1999, 2000, actually. So my PhD work was looking at walking patterns in CMT, and we've done some research since then. Now, I'm what they call a clinical academic in the UK. So I do clinics. I do a lot of clinics. I see one or two of you on the call in my clinic. And also, I'm a researcher, so I'm an honorary associate professor at UCL in London, where we actually do research. I lead the neuromuscular rehabilitation research group. So we do a lot of work in CMT, and I'm going to show you a bit of that today, just to sort of put some flesh on the bones of why we do what we do. So I'm going to give you some info from some of the research we've done, but also some tips, thinking about ways to improve strength, how to improve fitness and some of the ways that we've tried it, and how we've been looking at improving balance, and actually some future work we're going to do. Thinking about hands as well. They get a bit neglected, hands, in the research. So just a little bit on that. So when somebody comes to see me in clinic, As physiotherapists, we watch how you move. We might take some measures of strength and maybe time you're walking. But of course, how people move is very much determined about what's happening in the muscles. Now, I'm going to start with this, and some of you may have seen some of these images before, which is MRI. And so one of my colleagues, Dr. Jasper Morrow, so he does a lot of work in MRI. I've just come off with a meeting with him actually and Professor Riley because we're going to be doing more work. And so what you can see here, so this is if you were to cut through the leg, and that's the thigh, that's what the thigh muscles like. That's the thigh bone there, and that's the quadriceps muscles at the front, the hamstrings at the back. And then this is if you do the same down at the through the shin bone. So there's the big shin bone, the little fibula there. And these are the calf muscles and then the muscles at the front. So this is somebody who doesn't have CMT, and this is somebody who does. And so when we know that from a lot of this work that unfortunately, if you lose the connection between the nerve and the muscle, the muscle fiber turns into fat. And this is what we see further down the leg, because we know it starts in the extremities. But then if we look in the thigh, actually, you don't see so much of that. Although it's a little smaller. Now, for me, that tells me a bit about what I can target as a physiotherapist. Now, it's much harder you can't really reverse what's happened here. There's a bit here we can work with, but here, the fact that it's shrunk down shows me that that's not due to the CMT. That's because this person's been moving around less. And they've got what we call secondary disuse weakness. So you have the primary weakness from the CMT, but you can also have this secondary one. So if I were to go on to bed rest for 2 weeks, or be in a cast if I'd broken my leg, the same would happen to my muscle. It would just get a bit smaller. So for me as a physiotherapist, I'm thinking, right, we can do something about that because that's reversible. So we'll keep that in mind. So what about this weakness? What does it do? So we're very interested in balance. This is my colleague Andy. We set him up with all these different markers with infrared on. We got him stood and wibbling around and reaching so that we could to explore, well, what's static balance and what's active balance like. So with this particular one, we wanted to see how far forward he could reach, and we measured very accurately what that looked like. And what we found is that even the reaching forward, so this, sorry to sort of show technical grasp, but this is how far he reached forward. Well, this was actually people with CMT. This is how far people reached forwards. And this is the strength of the thigh muscles at the front. So actually, we found that how far people could reach depended on these thigh muscles. And they're the ones, like I showed you, that we can do something about. So can we improve some of this dynamic balance by strengthening some of those upper muscles? And then if we look, actually, when we also got people to reach out to the side, not just forwards, that was more to do with the ankle muscles, so the inversion muscles of the ankle, the ones on the inside of the ankle. So as you reach across, they're kind of holding you. And they're the ones that might be a little bit more affected by the CMT, if you could think back about those scans. So we're thinking about dynamic balance. That might give us a target to work on as a physio. But we also, we've done a lot of work looking at walking patterns, and we track people's walking with the infrared. And you can see, so this is somebody with CMT. Here you can see from the side, there's the foot drop. And what we found this was some of my PhD work actually, that we found that we got that drop foot, but also if there's weakness in the calf, and we see that not in everybody, but in many people, we don't get so much push forward from the calf. And so what tends to happen is people compensate with the hips, which is where people lift up, that steppage gait the neurologists talk about. And what it means is that the walking will be a bit slower, and also it's a bit more tiring because the upper muscles are having to do more. And we actually found that in a study. We got people walking on a treadmill until they hit a level of tiredness, but indicated by this Borg scale. So this is when people say, I'm working quite hard, very hard. And so they sort of stopped walking at about 48 minutes compared to the people who didn't. They walked for the same time but weren't as tired. So we know that actually walking is more tiring. And what happened as well is that it was the hip muscles that that started to fatigue when we did some strength measures with them. So if those thigh muscles are potentially a target, what work's been done then to see if they can be made stronger? So this was a really old paper in '95. That was just when I qualified. So there was strength training here. Of the thigh muscles. So this was a study that was done in the Netherlands, and in that study, 29 people with CMT, and what they found was when they looked at the strength of those muscles in the training group, they got a lot stronger compared to the group that didn't train, who actually got slightly weaker.
Yeah.
I think you might need to silence some microphones if that's okay. Thank you. So that's the study that was done then. Now we did a study a little while ago now where we thought, well, can we strengthen some of those hip muscles that have to compensate quite a lot? So we've got people lying down on their sofas or on their beds, put some ankle weights on, and people pulled their knees up to so basically the muscles here in the hips were doing the work. And we found that actually, yes, this is the strength measure from those muscles. So this is on the left and this is on the right, is that they also got stronger with training. So there's certainly evidence. So they got about 20% stronger. So there certainly seems to be evidence that we can make those upper muscles stronger. But what about those weaker muscles, the ones further down? So some of you probably come to clinic and we do those push-pull tests on you. Yeah, anybody comes to my clinic or the ones in London will know. So I don't know if anybody's ever explained the score to you, the call out numbers, 0, 3, what it actually means. So when we do that muscle testing, when you're pushing against us, if you've got normal strength or what we feel is normal and we can't break it, that we say that's a 5. If you can move against resistance through and move quite well and quite strongly, that's a 4. If you can't move against resistance, but you can only just move against gravity, but as soon as I put a resistance on, that becomes very difficult. That's a 3, so you can move against gravity. You can't move against gravity, but you can move, if we take gravity out of the equation and move that way, then that's a 2. And if you can't do full movement, that's a 1. And if there's no movement, that's a 0. So what does that mean then in terms of strengthening opportunities? Well, this was a lovely study that was done by our colleagues in Australia, in Sydney. So this is, some of you may have heard of Professor Burns, Josh Burns. So they did a study on teenagers and young people. So they put these ankle cuffs or a foot cuff, and they put one half of the participants, they put some weights in, and the other half of them, they didn't put any weights in. So they were just doing the movement. Now on this graph, this is the strength of that muscle at the front, and this is over 2 years. So the group who didn't have any weights in there, they just did the very slow progression that we would expect to see with CMT over 2 years, which is actually represented by this green line. It looks like it's worse, but it's actually not. It's because there's a lot of variation in the group. It's about the same. It's just that these are overlapping those points. Now, this is the group that actually exercised. Now, I still don't know to this day how they got teenagers to do this very boring exercise for 6 months. I mean, they were obviously masters of motivation. I don't know if I'd do it, to be honest with you. But anyway, so they got them to do it. They got stronger over 6 months. And then even after it stopped, there was still an improvement. And they were 30% stronger after a year. But what I think was really encouraging is that after 2 years, they were still just shy of 30% stronger. So there's something happening here. There's something potentially protective here, I think. They started early because I think younger people are less affected because of the timeline. But I think what is worth saying here is that for this particular study, the criteria to be involved was that they already had to move against resistance. They had to be able to pull that up. So I think my rule of thumb, and I know the team well who did this work, is that, what I do in clinic is if you can move your joint or flex an ankle or a knee against some resistance when I'm testing, then you've probably got an opportunity to strengthen. So even those muscles down at the bottom of the feet that we know are a bit more affected. And I have to say, just in clinic, if somebody can move against gravity, I'll encourage them to do that. It becomes, obviously, if there's no movement there, we can't really work with that, unfortunately. But that's where exercising the other muscles at the tops of the legs are important to try and and help with the ability to compensate and stabilize. So that's strength. Now let's think about fitness. So so this is Liz, and this is poor Andy again. He obviously got experimented on quite a lot. So this is in our lab where we're doing the exercise test on the bike cone. You can see he's got a mask on, and here we're measuring the gas exchange, the uptake of oxygen, and how much carbon dioxide somebody is breathing out. And so from that, this is sort of classic exercise testing, and we were working him until he worked very hard, until his maximum. And we did this with people with CMT as well. And what we found is that I think we had about 28 people with CMT. And so we found that one of the measures, which is the VO2 peak, so that's the oxygen uptake, the maximum oxygen uptake during this test, was a bit less in the group with CMT, which just indicates this is a representation of like aerobic fitness, so or cardiorespiratory fitness. So it was about 80% less than we would have expected if you counted for somebody's age and sex. So why might that be? So we previously, this is my colleague Alex Pollard, who was a fellow with us for a while, and we put some of these these are the old style activity monitors before they all got sort of slim and in your watch or in your ring or whatever, all the different ones they do now. But this was sort of a little bit old school. But we put these activity monitors on people for 7 days. And that was 20 people with CMT and then 20 people who didn't have CMT but were the same age and sex. And so what we looked at was steps per day over the 7 days. What was the average? So the average for the people who didn't have CMT was about 11,500. For the people with CMT, it was about 6,500. So there's a little bit of a reduction in activity, and that might account for why we were seeing that slight reduction, that 80% of the fitness levels. And also maybe that's what we saw in the scan where the muscle was a bit smaller. That might be the disuse. So of course this is the group. Sorry, my door keeps banging. It's a bit breezy here in the UK at the moment. Okay, so what can we do about that? So this is my colleague Dr. Amanda Wallace, who so I led this study, and Amanda was the main trials physiotherapist and coordinator for this. So we had the 28 people with CMT, and we got people in their local gyms on these exercise bikes, particularly these recumbent bikes, because they were a bit better from a balance perspective. People felt a bit more comfortable on them. And so they did 12 weeks of exercise. So we started gradually, and then by the end of it, everybody was doing about 30 minutes, 3 times a week at 80% of their maximum heart rate, which was actually working pretty hard. So with a bit of grading to get there, everybody got there and was actually able to do it. Then, so one group started with the exercise, and then they had 8 weeks where they didn't do anything to get it wash out, and then they had a period where they didn't do much, and then another group started with that control period and then did the training after. So it's called a crossover trial. And what we found is that with the training, people got this, an improvement. It was about an 11% improvement in that VO2 peak measure. So people got fitter. But not, that's a reasonable amount of fitness. And when we asked people, well, how did you feel? Because we also interviewed people, and they said, well, I felt more energized. I felt positive. I was doing something about my condition. Some people reported that it helped with fatigue as well. So that was super encouraging. So again, yes, we're seeing when we're on the baseline that that people might be a little bit fitter, but it's something we can do something about. We can improve this. We've just shown it. So that's reassuring. But of course, engaging in exercise can be a challenge when you're living with a condition that makes it, more challenging to move around. And we did this work where we were asking people with rare neurological conditions, not just CMT, but also muscular dystrophy and Huntington disease and other ataxia, other conditions. And so what we found was that we split it into 3 factors. So the first one was to do with the environment and the organisation. So actually getting access to specialist services, the issue to do with communication between specialist services and local services. And actually overall, there was a poor understanding of their condition. access to community exercise facilities. Now, in blue are the ones that were specific to rare conditions. In white is actually anybody with a neurological condition, even a common one like stroke or MS, also have problems in terms of public transport, accessing the facilities themselves and the range of activities. So, but the in blue is what was specific to somebody with a rare condition. And then there was what we called interpersonal factors and intrapersonal factors. So interpersonal factors is actually how somebody interacts with, say, a therapist or an exercise professional or even their own family. And again, in blue, there was a poor knowledge of rare conditions, people knowing that risk versus benefit balance when prescribing exercise, as well as the general issues like confidence or fear of falling or burden on family. And then in terms of intrapersonal, that's the inside the person themselves. Often the people themselves didn't always have the knowledge of the risk versus benefit and knowing what to do when and how. And then, of course, there are common things like motivation, dealing with stigma when exercising in front of others. Some people felt that gyms weren't welcoming, for example. So that was actually helpful for us to think, well, yes, we might prescribe exercise, but we also need to have an eye on those wider issues that might be affecting how people can stay active and have physically active lifestyles. So, of course, one of those key symptoms that can be a factor is fatigue and tiredness. And so other studies have shown that about 64% of people with CMT can report severe fatigue, but there are different types. And so we did some interviews of some years ago now where people actually said to us, there's tiredness and then there's the fatigue tiredness, and we see them as two different things. We can be tired and it's just normal if we've done too much. And then we described the fatigue tiredness. And the sort of thing that they said was that this fatigue tiredness, which they perceived as being different, didn't always link to doing too much, could be quite an overwhelming symptom. So Jill here is saying it's like an overwhelming tidal wave. I can feel it approaching and I just have to sit down and I'm asleep. And then Anita said it's like packing up. It's like my body's letting me down. You're telling me to stop. Sorry, that was Sheila. And then Anita said everything's heavy. So that's quite different to when people say to me in clinic, well, yes, I find if I do a lot, oh gosh, my legs get tired, but if I have a rest, I feel a bit better. I'm a bit refreshed. So there's two things going on. So if we start sort of thinking about now what we might be able to do about fatigue, there's a great research group in the Netherlands, and they did this study where they looked at they called it Energetic, which I thought was quite an optimistic title for the trial, where they were looking at a self-management program for fatigue. So this was looking at 53 people with neuromuscular conditions, including 5 people who had CMT. The other people had muscular dystrophies. And so what they did, it was a 4-month group program. So they did some aerobic exercise training, like I showed you before. They did some education on exercise. So that knowledge piece about what to do when and how, which we saw in our physical activity surveys and interviews, how to conserve manage energy, how to implement and any relapse prevention as well. And then what they did, they compared that to people who just had their usual care. And what they showed was this is the COPM. It's called the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure. This is about how many activities or how much people can do activity-wise in their day-to-day lives. And interestingly, the slide I showed you before with all the different reasons for barriers to physical activity, we also did some work in that study where we've got people to say, well, what's important to you? What would be an important improvement if we were to support you to be more physically active? And everybody said being able to do more day-to-day stuff, day-to-day activities. And this is essentially what the COPM measures. It's occupational therapists use it quite a lot. So what we found with the group that did the energetic intervention, so this is at baseline, everyone at the same level, and this was at 4 months, 3 months, no, posted in 4 months, and then 2 to 3 months after that, and then I think 11 months. So that everybody felt that they could do more in the intervention group. It started to tail off slightly, but they still stayed, that they were able to do more. But certainly this is actually really compelling. So, but it does show that maybe ongoing support is important to help people keep at that level. So another switch of focus is balance and falls, which is something I'm particularly doing a lot more work in at the moment. This was some of our early work where we just simply sent a survey out and said, ask people, how often do you fall over? And what people said was, it was a range, so ranging from 5% it was once a day, or 17% it was once a year. But you can see this biggest group was at least once a month. And when we looked at, well, that wasn't because that tended to be an older group who fell more. It wasn't that at all. It was, but that's more than we'd expect for the age group of the people that we were talking to. And the reasons and where people fell, people tended to fall at home. I think people are often more concerned about falling outdoors because of getting stranded or injuries, etc. But actually, in reality, it's probably because people kick off their orthotics, or you're comfortable in your environment, so maybe concentrate a little bit less. But it's mainly in people's home. But outdoors was also quite significant. But certainly uneven ground, stairs. Some people didn't remember, recall where they were. So we've done something about that. So this is Magda. So Magda's a brilliant research physio who works with us. She's doing her PhD. This is one of her PhD studies, and all of her PhD is around balance. And so we just did a pilot study with so that's like an initial small study you do just to see, can we do it? Does it work for people in their home initially? And then we can do a larger study. So we had 15 people. They did this balance training. So thinking back to what I was just talking about, we did some strengthening work. We also did some work where we got people to think about their balance, what we call proprioception. So the other thing we often do in clinic is we stab you with little pins and put tuning forks on you, and then maybe we'll get you to stand with your feet together and close your eyes to see how much you sway around. And that's to look at how much is that loss of sensation impacting your balance. Because balance is a very sensory thing. It's about, the muscles have to be able to produce enough force to stop you falling over. But you have to know where you are. If your body has shifted, you have to be able to pick that up quickly. And if you're not got quite the feeling to pick that up in the feet, the ankles, or the lower leg, often people will use vision to compensate. So that's why some of you may find that you're a bit more wobbly if you're in the shower or in dark places. So actually, but we got people to play around with that in a safe area. So I'm a big fan of getting people standing in corners or close to kitchen worktops where you can put a hand down if you need to. But actually then play around with eyes open, eyes closed, or eyes open but not staring into one point, because we often will visually spot to compensate. And then some people, we could get them on these sort of soft surfaces. This is a balance pad, but you can see how this person is near the worktop. And we had our colleague Louis, who's a physio, who was going in and training people. And what we found was we did this was for 12 weeks. And what we found is that these are some of the balance tests that we do in clinic, and this is walking speed. So we saw improvements with the training group in these 3 balance tests that that physios tend to do: the Berg balance, the best test, and the functional gait assessment. And then here it looks like it's worse. It's not. This just means people were quicker, so it improved walking speed. Now this was only in 15 people, but the changes were such that we were quite compelled by this. And then when we had people in our posture lab and looking at how much people sway around, there was a reduction in how much people swayed around with the different conditions who'd been doing the training. So as a result of that, this was sort of compelling, and we were quite excited by it. So we've now got funding to do a bigger study, and it's called Better Balance. NMD is the whole program, and the Better Balance CMT study, which we're going to be developing the intervention in the next couple of months, and then the trial will kick off in the new year. Where we're going to do a trial of 84 people with CMT, with all different types of CMT, to see whether or not we can see if this works in this bigger cohort of people. And we're not the only ones to have looked at balance. In Italy, there's a great group of researchers in Italy, and there's lots of colleagues there who have a similar interest as us in terms of tracking movement and in the balance lab and walking. And they did this study looking at people walking on treadmills. And so one group of people just did some stretching and some of those proprioceptive exercises that, like I showed you, that we did in our study on the previous slide. And then some people did the same, but they also did some treadmill training over 3 months as well. And this was all people with CMT1A. And what they found is that they both groups had improved walking speed and endurance. But interestingly, the people who did the treadmill training also had a much bigger improvement in balance. Now, I know these guys, so I was talking to them about it, and I said, well, do you think that people were having to react to that moving surface? And that's a form of training in itself. So again, I think it's quite compelling that, you know, maybe that actually not just doing the strength and the sensory work that we did in ours, but actually maybe we also need to look at studies where we safely, look at how people react to it being knocked. You know, you're thinking about in a crowd, the worst thing is if somebody knocks into you, or if you're on a train or a bus or something where the surface moves, how you react to it. So actually that might be something that we could work up as well, and that's something I'm quite interested in doing. And I mentioned about hands and how hands are quite neglected. And so some colleagues in the Netherlands some years ago did look at hands, that actually the problems are definitely affected by weakness of the muscles, but also the reduced sensations. If people are quite numb in the fingers, that does really impact dexterity. If the muscles are very fatigable, we hear that sometimes, that's why we often work in the UK, we'll often write to schools so that kids have an extra 20% time if they're doing their exams, just to account for that hand fatigue. And then the grip patterns are altered, and then I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that, but I see some really innovative ways that people tie their shoelaces in clinic. And actually the dexterity tends to be determined by how weak the hands are. And that obviously can, it's the fiddly fine task, the day-to-day activities and quality of life. Now, the same group, so Anamika Videla she was a physiotherapist, I think she still is, but I don't think she works in CMT anymore, unfortunately. But she tried one of these little thumb cuffs, just to see if by bringing the thumb forwards, particularly if people are weak in this muscle in the thumb, that help. And sometimes our OTs give this out. So that was effective. There was some controversy for a while, actually, because when they looked at the strength of the hand, sometimes the dominant hand was a little weaker when you were using our 0 to 5 scale that I showed you earlier. But the problem with that is that 0 to 5 scale is quite a coarse scale. It doesn't show subtle differences. So that was sort of repeated and wasn't shown to be such a problem. But we certainly saw it in as well in people with CMT1A using the 0 to 5 scale. But I'm just going to hear some background noise. Are we all muted? Brilliant. But when we actually use some of the machines to measure, which are much more sensitive to much finer detail on the strength, there didn't seem to be that different. So it's something we keep an eye on. I mean, the thing is with hands, we actually move our hands 10,000 times a day. Can you believe it or not? Particularly me, because I wave mine around a lot. So I think even if there is a difference because of how often we move our hands, if it is there, it's very tiny, almost you can't distinguish, and it shouldn't be a reason for not doing general exercise, because as we've seen, there's other that disuse weakness, the potential to actually improve strength. I really don't want people missing out on that and getting unfit. And there's another colleague who's a physiotherapist in Italy, Valeria Prada. So she did a small study to start off with, where she it was like another pilot study, a bit like the one we did, where she got people doing these different strengthening exercises for a month. So where you different movements of the fingers, of the thumb, stretching, some things where people were manipulating marbles and putty, and then doing some proprioception exercises. And what she found with that is that people could reach their thumb across their fingers. That was one of the measures, as well as looking at different shapes of grips. And then she also did some measures of strength. And she found that with the training that people got a little bit stronger in some of these different grip patterns. And so again, it shows promise. Needs to be scaled up, and she and I have talked about whether or not we try and scale that up, with an international study. So that's all the nerdy bit from me. That's all the data and kind of what we're basing some of our decisions on when we're supporting people in clinic. But what I would say is that if you are starting to exercise, if exercise is a bit new to you, some of you won't, some of you will have already be well in there, but if it is new and you're a bit worried about it, what we always say is, start at a lower intensity and duration. Our colleagues in the Netherlands have this lovely phrase, start low and go slow. And I think that's really, really good advice, because you go in too hard, too fast, you get muscle soreness. We all do, but in some people, it'll be a little bit more exaggerated, may take longer to go. And then that's unpleasant. And it just means if you're very fatigable as well, it means you can control your fatigue a bit more. And then it's a very gradual increase over weeks. So, if it's a strength one, like this one, for example, I might start somebody off, particularly if somebody's quite fatigable, start somebody off at like 4 or 5 reps, and then maybe increase it by 1 rep every 2 weeks. We're talking that gradual, because then there will be it's not going to be so much of a risk of overburdening and over fatiguing muscles. But there's certainly not any evidence that you can do harm and accelerate the CMT. It's just much more about managing the fatigue and any muscle soreness. Muscle soreness itself is actually a form of muscle remodeling. So we don't want to be scared of it, but we don't want it to be too excessive, because it's just not that nice and can put people off. And so, like I said here, if people are very fatigued, avoid overexertion and remaining with that energy envelope, which people talk about, some of you who might have had pacing or occupational therapy for that. And it's about staying motivated as well. I mean, the gym isn't for everyone. I'm not the biggest fan of the gym, I'll be honest. But find something that you find fun. For some people, it might be, putting the music on and having a little boogie around the kitchen, or I like pedaling around, so I if you enjoy pedaling or a bit of golf. And don't underestimate convenience. If things are on your doorstep, you're more likely to, rather than if you happen to go a long way to go and access something. So if there's an exercise bike or something, like you say, the music in your kitchen is super convenient. And don't start too hard, going back to what I said earlier about building up gradually. And the other one is find a body. I mean, nothing is better than a bit of peer support. Maybe it's peer pressure, I don't know, but if it means that it helps, somebody can egg you on, and I don't think it has to be somebody with CMTs as such. It could be just somebody who's willing to go and work out with you, and also set some goals. I think I do go for a jog. I'm not the biggest fan, but sometimes I'll actually decide I'm going to go and enter an event and raise some money, and that gives me my goal, makes me do it, makes me get off the couch. So it's finding maybe some goals. So maybe raising some money for CMTA, doing a swimathon or whatever you want to do, or just set some personal goals as well. But that can write them down somewhere, so that you can do that. The other thing is about physical activity through the day. And certainly I think COVID taught me this, is that actually, staying physically active, doing big bouts of activity can be quite daunting. So actually doing a bit of intermittent exercise through the day can work. I have to do it myself today because I've not really had much chance to get out. I've had a super busy day, but every time I go and put my coffee machine on, I've got some weights. So I've been doing squats. And some arm exercises while the coffee's actually filtering through. So it's sort of taken that opportunity. So I've got up to 60 squats so far with weights. So I need to do a few more. But that little and often really is key. And that also helps with that fatigability. And so one of my patients who comes to my clinic, I was telling her about this little and often. And I said, maybe think about it like exercise snacks. And she said, well, why don't you just call it snack-a-size. And so I know Catherine's on the call, and she and I have talked about this. And actually, maybe we need to get some bands with snack-a-size on that people can wear, and then maybe a little reminder. But what it does, it helps to avoid fatigue and that overexertion. And actually, that you can still get those cumulative benefits. So yeah, I might have only done my squats today in sort of 10 or 20 rep bursts. But if I, by the end of the day, if I've done 100, it all adds up, doesn't it? My muscles have had a bit of a workout. And actually creating those habits. So for me, that habit is tagging it. So that my rule is my law that if I touch that button on the coffee machine, I've got to squat, so it does that. Or it might be that actually you do your balance exercises when you're brushing your teeth. What I sometimes do when I'm brushing my teeth is I might do some calf raises or something. So I do practice what I preach, I promise. So it's only because I don't like the gym. So that's why. And creating those easy opportunities. So this girl here, don't tell Professor Riley, any of you who knows her, or Professor Shire, or anybody, that sometimes when I'm on these meetings with them, the Zoom meetings, and my camera's off, I have it's gone actually. I have my bit of exercise band. It's normally it's because I've been traveling and I put it in my suitcase, but I normally have it on my arm of my chair here, and I might do some exercises while, the camera's off and somebody else is talking. I'm still listening, but then my arms are getting a workout. So it's having things on your desk that will actually give you some easy opportunities. And then the non-exercise activity. So that's just being active. That's just moving around, whether you're like gardening or doing a bit of fishing, breaking up those long periods of sitting, using that little and often principle we've talked about, and things that sort of generally get you moving. Now, just a little signpost to a resource. So in the UK, the equivalent of the MDA, we have the NDUK. Now, some of our my colleagues who are occupational therapists and physiotherapists did this really fantastic document about how to manage fatigue for anybody living with a muscle wasting condition. And they work with people with muscular dystrophy and CMT in developing this. And there's this great graph that I think illustrates what I was just telling you. So there is a tendency for some people with fatigue to try and do this sort of boom and bust approach. So they're like, I've got to keep going, I've got to push through it. Oh, I'm getting rid of, oh God, I'm absolutely exhausted now. I've got to rest. Oh, I'm not feeling better. I've got to get. So it's that boom and bust. But actually what they recommend is actually just taking moderate activity and moderate rest, and you can sort of keep going on a level without that boom and bust. So the pacing I mentioned in one of the other slides. So a little bit with frequent rest helps to keep that activity consistent. And if anybody wants, and I can share this with Riley actually, if anybody wants to download this, I can share the link for distribution. It's a great document. It's got some really nice things in there. And the other thing that I'll share with you is that we developed this online resource called Bridges. It's called Neuromuscular Bridges. So this is, we did this with people living with CMT and muscular dystrophy and mitochondrial disease who come to our clinics. And they told us what they thought would help them in terms of solving certain problems, how to react to being diagnosed, etc. And they came up with the title. So they said, for them, it's about adapting to life with a neuromuscular condition. And so what we have in there, we've got people who've shared their stories. There's videos of them having conversations about things, some audio where we interview people. People have very kindly shared their stories, the family members as well. So there's parents and partners and siblings on there. And then they asked for some Q&A. So we've got Becca, who's an OT. This is Andy, who's an orthotist, and Charlotte, who's a physio. So there's videos of us answering certain questions like, what sort of shoes should I wear with splints? I've not even talked about orthotics today because that's a whole other talk. But yeah, so you can have a little look, and I can share the link to that as well. There's also helpful resources on there to signpost to as well. So I'll finish there, I think, and as I say, I'll share those. And this is our great crew I work with of physios, speech therapists, and also, of course, the neurologists and our nurses in the centre. And some of the work I've presented today is by some of them. So thank you.
Thank you so much. This was absolutely incredible. I know that I learned so much, and this was amazing, amazing. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your time with us, just from the community. Thank you. We have quite a bit of questions, so we might not be able to get to all of them, but I'm just going to go ahead and read through the chat and feel free to answer. The first question is there an exercise that can improve foot drop? Which muscles would the exercise target and improve?
So the one I showed you from Australia, actually, but with that caveat, they already have to have a bit of movement there to be able to do it. So I don't know, do you want me to get that one back up again, or can you remember what that looked like? I mean, I can share that actually quickly if that's helpful. So you can see down at the bottom here.
Yes.
Yeah, so that they're here they had a cuff. Sometimes what I get people to do is, you can get like the wrist weights or the ankle weights, the light ones, just strap them around the foot and you can move those up and down, or you can get some resistance band. You could have the other foot to keep one end of the band on the floor and then the other one pull up. So that's what you can do. But what I would say is, if you're going to be putting weight, using weight to pull up like that, you need to be able to already move against a bit of weight to be able to build on it. If you can just move against gravity, just do that. Now, what I think as well is that, everybody will plateau at some point. You might get a little bit of change and plateau. So it very much, how much change you make will depend on how weak or strong you are at the baseline.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Our next question is there anything that can be done to address severe fatigue?
So I think that the occupational therapists do a fatigue management, which is actually detailed in that booklet, which is quite helpful. But any of you see occupational therapists, you can ask them about fatigue management. They're very good at it across neurological diseases, actually. Light exercise that we found with our exercise bike training, people felt more refreshed, a bit more energized as well. As long as it's graded and people don't go in too hard. There aren't any medications yet that really help. Although, I mean, some people talk about taking coenzyme Q10. It's not really been proven in CMT. Anecdotally, some people find that's helpful. But what I would say is sort of, I would use a combination of managing it through pacing, but then some very light graded, super graded, intermittent, gentle exercise.
Okay. Our next question is, if you run out of breath before all of your non-CMT friends, is this likely because of CMT?
It might be that secondary effect that I was showing you. It might be just that your fitness is a bit down, but like I said, you've got an opportunity to improve that. It's just trying to find the best way to do it.
Absolutely. Do alternative nerve stimulation methods and red light help with balance?
So it's a good question about the
Yes.
nerves, about this nerve, because some of you may know that people use what they call NMAS or functional electrical stimulation, FES. People with MS or stroke have that. The shame is with neuropathy is that if your nerves, in order for that to work, you need to have intact nerves to be able to send the message up, which we don't have if you live with CMT, which is a real shame, because I think it's often quite pushed on the neurological communities, and it doesn't work for people who have nerve damage. Unfortunately, the currents you need, when some of you will have had the neurophysiological tests, the electrical tests, those horrible ones where they zap you. So the fact that they need to use quite high currents, which is why they're often quite uncomfortable, shows how much current is needed to even get a very small, often a very and we're talking about particularly the muscles at the extremities. Higher up, maybe not so much, but then you're actually better off just using your own movement and voluntary movement to do that. So the bad news is that doesn't work, unfortunately. Red light, I don't think anybody's ever studied it. Some people talk about the vibration plates, actually. I get quite a lot of questions about vibration plates. It's been looked at in other populations. We've never looked at it in CMT. There might be some rationale to it because the vibration is actually stimulating to some of the muscles receptors. So, you know, when they put the tuning forks on, that's the receptors that they're testing for, that vibration. Possibly, some people find it quite helpful just anecdotally. But again, we don't have evidence yet. But I think that has perhaps a bit more rationale than something like red light or, yeah.
Absolutely. A community member was told not to exercise too much or it will damage the nerve further. Is this accurate?
No. So absolutely not. We could put that one to bed, and it's frustrating us that people are still told that. You will not accelerate the CMT through exercise.
Thank you for making that very clear. Um, Barry asked if we could please provide this literature or a link to your presentation to share with our local physical therapist and occupational therapist.
Yes, of course. Yes, I don't yet. I think everything on there is published. So yeah, feel free.
Wonderful. I always know that I have a hard time advocating for myself to my local physical therapist, so this presentation is absolutely incredible. Okay, our next question is that someone has a bilateral foot drop and they do not use the treadmill, but instead they use an elliptical for 5 to 7 days a week and they work out for 30 minutes.
Wonderful.
Okay,
Yeah,
yes.
wonderful. We love
I
that.
wanted to know your thoughts, and I figured you would be very adamant about this.
Yeah. What I would say is that, again, this is a bit anecdotal, though I know there are some colleagues in France who've been looking at this. I've seen probably nearly 1,000 people with CMT now coming through clinics over the years. And the people who stay active and exercise, particularly to that level, do better.
Yeah.
That's not, but that isn't to say that, that's not to dismiss how challenging it can be to engage in exercise sometimes. But, exercising to a good level like that, I really see the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a lot of personal questions about exercising and what that looks like in my CMT journey. And I've asked Dr. Catherine Forsey a lot of questions because she started exercising and it's really changed her life, honestly. So if any of you have any questions, I'm sure she would be happy to answer them as well. But I'm just going to throw you in there, Catherine. But I know you have helped me a lot. So if any of you want to email her, she's a wonderful resource as well. Okay, our next question is exercise is important for sure, but so is the proper exercises specifically for CMT. Is there any of them to address strength, weakness, balance, etc., that they can be doing?
I think a bit of everything, actually. I think it's so when we think about, physical conditioning, it's about strength, it's about fitness, and it's about flexibility and balance. So, I've given you some tasters today from the presentation of ways that we've done it in our studies. And there are resources out there now. I know CMTA do some great videos on things you can try. CMT UK have done it as well for those of you over here. So there are there are videos. When we do the Better Balance project as well, we're going to be developing videos and advice for therapists as well, that once we've tested it, we can get that out there as well. I want that to be freely accessible and downloadable for people, to give people ideas. Oh, there's actually one resource I forgot to put on my slides, but I will tell you about it and I can share it as well. So one of a really nice strengthening exercise approach is Pilates, which uses elements of yoga and strengthening and stretching. So one of my lovely colleagues who used to work with us, she was a Pilates instructor and a physiotherapist. So they did a series of videos for people with neuromuscular conditions, of Pilates that people could try as well. So yeah, and actually I've just seen that it popped up about Pilates Reformer. I know people who've done that one-to-one have said that that's very good as well. But if you can't access that, or you're a bit nervous before trying that, sometimes it's really nice to at least have a bit of a taster with some of the videos. And the good thing is with these videos, they're not going to, I am a tree or something standing on one leg. This is all designed for people with neuromuscular conditions, including CMT. So hopefully that will be, a good introduction to people who want to try out Pilates.
Absolutely. I love Pilates. I was really scared about what that looked like. So I went on YouTube and I did Pilates at home so that I could figure out what I was getting into before I went to a studio. So if any of you are a little shy like me, that's a great alternative as well. So just to dip your toe in the water to what the heck Pilates is. We have just a few more minutes, but I saw a question in the chat that I think is very interesting. It says, are there any differences in exercise needs for different types of CMT?
Very good question.
Yes.
My rule of thumb is, and I do say this to the neurologists, is that I say it depends on how a person presents. Of course, what we see in some, so there, for example, with with somebody who has CMT1A, that there's a particular pattern of weakness and the what happens with the foot arches that might be a bit different to somebody maybe with CMT2A, for example, or distal hereditary motor neuropathy. So there can be some subtle differences, but my rule of thumb is that you just self-assess, and where you're weak is where you should target, or if you're unfit, that's to target. I think that's, I don't like to get too bogged down in the gene. Actually, for me, it's more about how the person presents when they come and see me, which drives the neurologist crazy because they're all obsessed with the genes. But actually, what I do, and people who come to my clinic, I will do those strength tests. I will look at the balance, the sensation. I will test balance, watch walking, and then that gives me the ideas of where I need to go in and make suggestions of where and how to work on from an exercise perspective.
Wonderful. Okay, one more quick question for you. This one's will be pretty quick. How can we strengthen our calves given that they are so tight living with CMT?
So I think it's actually really important to keep strengthening the calves, because they give you your propulsion forward, and the calf muscles are really important for balance. Because as we stand, if you imagine that the ankle is like a hinge, our calf muscles are the ones that actually keep us upright against gravity. They stop us falling forward on our nose. So actually, they're really important to keep strong. However, you also need to stretch them. So some of you might have been shown how to stretch one foot in front of the other, trying to get the heel down. There's one I quite like where you put your foot up on a chair. So your foot is flat and then you push forward with your knee to try and bend the ankle. I quite like that one because you can see a bit more and lean into it. So so stretching is super important for tightness, but strengthening, I would say still strengthen, because those calf muscles, I think everybody is more aware of the weakness at the front of the shin because of foot drop. But actually, and this came from my PhD work actually, when we were tracking walking patterns, the impact of the weakness in the calf is really slows down walking. It means you can't stride out so much. So walking up slopes is more difficult. So that's why, doing that. And the one thing I haven't mentioned, I did see it pop up as the chat questions came up, was about AFOs. And of course, I haven't really gone into that because I say that's a whole other talk. If you are quite wobbly and unstable, if it's difficult to stand still, then do exercise in your AFOs, go walking in your AFOs. So there are some sports braces which can give quite good support that you can, if you wanted to go to the gym, or if your foot turns a lot and it won't stay on a pedal, then actually having some of the ankle braces that are designed for people who sprain their ankles a lot, that the athletes wear. There are some that are very good for that. That actually we used in our exercise trial for people who had problems keeping their feet on a pedal. Probably work as well for like elliptical trainers as well, just to give that bit of stability. So actually, I only really skirted around AFOs, but actually I think they can be really helpful. And actually, I think when we do our study, if people have got very weak calf muscles and difficulty standing still, we'll get people to still do it, but in their AFOs. And actually, tune up those balance responses from the knees upwards, because it's still important.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time. You have been an excellent, excellent resource. And I wanted to thank all of our community for sharing a little bit of your Monday with us and for joining. We are so appreciative of all of you and can't thank you enough. So thank you, everyone. And I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your Monday.